yellow letters, Black Lives Matter, is now painted in front of President Trump's home on Fifth Avenue. The same message the president has deemed a symbol of hate now adorns his doorstep. Reversing course. With Arizona now considered one of the world's largest COVID hotspots, the state is shutting down indoor dining to try to stop the spread. People waiting for hours to get tested. The overwhelming infection rate across the Sun Belt. And Dr. Anthony Fauci now says troubled states should consider pausing their reopening plans instead of completely shutting back down. And just one day after the vice president promised to change the CDC guidelines for schools, the CDC director says it will not be revising guidelines despite pressure from the president. Major decisions from the Supreme Court coming in today on President Trump's financial records, ruling he cannot keep his tax returns from a prosecutor, but denying Congress for now. The president's appointees not ruling in his favor. And tonight, President Trump's reaction, begging for his life. Newly released transcripts from police body cameras detailed George Floyd's final moments, repeatedly warning officers they were killing him, saying, "I can't breathe," at least 20 times. Former police officer Derek Chauvin responding, "It takes a lot of oxygen to talk." Tornado outbreak, extreme damage from a series of twisters as it destroys homes. One of the tornadoes turning deadly. And fledgling restaurants, the sites of potential infection spread, crushed as an industry.
Here comes coronavirus knocking on the door, and you go from, $100,000 a week in sales to 5,000. So it's like, boom.
And now the employees who weigh their options of holding on to their jobs or potentially risking their lives. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with Arizona, the first state in the country to trigger crisis care standards to help doctors and nurses make the agonizing decision of who gets treatment by prioritizing patients. About 90% of ICU beds are now full in a state that was reluctant to close and quick to reopen. And we now have data that correlates this current surge in cases to hastily reopened economies. The line graphs compiled by the New York Times spike skyward after several weeks of various phased reopenings. Florida and South Carolina were among the first states to reopen and are now leading the current surge. Texas today with a new daily record, more than 100 people dead in just the last 24 hours. And Arizona leads the country in COVID-related hospitalizations. Our Matt Gutman is there and leads us off tonight.
Tonight, in car after car, the nation's COVID testing crisis on full display in Phoenix. A public health failure stretching as far as the horizon. Moments ago, Arizona's governor saying,
"Today, there's a new executive order that will limit indoor dining to less than 50% occupancy. You want to be in places where you can limit the number of people." 3 generations of Kiana Cole's family parked in that line before 1 a.m.
Is it worth spending a night in a car with an 80-year-old? Yes?
I say yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, because it's our lives, and the lives of our families that we have to protect.
People started lining up here before 1 a.m., and there's a reason for that. This testing site does not require insurance or an appointment, which is why this line already goes down for miles as far as the eye can see.
And those numbers. The Sun Belt states that may have reopened too quickly, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. This graph by the New York Times showing a jaw-dropping nearly 1,400% increase in average daily COVID cases in Florida compared to when the state reopened about 2 months ago. Dr. Anthony Fauci warning states with severe outbreaks should seriously look at shutting down, telling 538's Podcast 19 that some opened too fast.
Despite the guidelines and the recommendations to open up carefully and prudently, some states skipped over those and just opened up too quickly. Certainly Florida, I think jumped over a couple of checkpoints.
More than a quarter of everyone tested in Miami-Dade testing positive. ICU beds are scarce and patients are dying alone.
One of the worst feelings of being there is seeing these patients fight for their lives and not having their families near them.
In Jacksonville, residents and business owners now suing to block the Republican National Convention from coming to the city next month. 10 states setting records for hospitalizations. South Carolina's Tidelands Hospital inundated.
We're at the maximum we can do. No beds in the ICU, no beds in the hospital.
Last night, we showed you video shot by the Associated Press, medical staff at a Houston hospital trying to pump life back into this COVID patient's ravaged lungs. But they lost her. The woman's daughter says her mother got sick last month, about a week after her husband's funeral. She said many didn't wear masks. Late today, President Trump falsely claiming
we have among the lowest mortality rate anywhere in the world.
But Dr. Fauci presenting a different reality than the president.
But as a country, when you compare us to other countries, I don't think you can say we're doing great. I mean, we're just not.
Yeah, not doing great at all. And Matt Gutman joins us now in Phoenix. And Matt, tell us more about the testing initiative that's underway there.
What you're seeing behind me is a privately funded testing initiative. It's gotten some money from the federal government, but they've administered about 1,100 tests so far. Maybe they can do a few hundred more, but they're going to be hundreds of people who are going to be cut off. They're not going to be able to get in here, which means they, and all these people too, are going to have to wait 10 days, 2 weeks for results, will go back into their communities, possibly spreading the virus. And what you are seeing, Lindsay, behind me is essentially the collapse of the testing system. It is clearly not working because if people have to wait that long to get tests, not only do epidemiologists not get an accurate snapshot at all of what's happening, but they could possibly spread the virus more to the community. So this is not a good situation right now.
Yeah, not at all. And today, the governor of Arizona held his first news conference in more than a week. Certainly, many people have been waiting to hear from him. What did he have to say?
He hasn't spoken publicly about the virus in 9 days. He had admitted fault. He said, this has been a disaster. June has been very difficult. We have failed. What he said is they're going to start beefing up testing. They're getting federal help. They hope to get to about 35,000 tests a day. Again, this is great. This is the right move. He also said they're going to close restaurants to 50% capacity. Fine. The issue continues to be the backlog in labs. You can administer as many tests as you want, but unless people get results and get them in a timely fashion, it doesn't mean anything. Lindsay.
Right, and certainly doesn't account for the people who have not even gotten tested there yet. Okay, Matt Gutman, our thanks to you.
Exactly.
And now to the question on every parent's mind: what will school look like in the fall, and will it be safe? We're talking to Alberto Carvalho, superintendent of Miami-Dade Schools in Florida. That's the 4th largest school district in the country, and it's in a COVID-19 hotspot. Thanks so much for joining us, Superintendent.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So Florida's governor, as you well know, has ordered public schools statewide to reopen in late August for in-person classes 5 days a week. That's also what the president wants. But you're saying that you will not open your schools in a traditional way if cases continue to surge. So do you have the power to ultimately go against the state order? And are you hoping that other superintendents might follow your lead?
Well, I have the power to speak the truth and the power to inform my community about the current circumstances here in our community. And here's what we know. Positivity rates are higher in Miami-Dade and keep growing. Hospitalization rates keep increasing daily. The mortality rate in the state of Florida is up. And the number of ICU beds occupied by COVID-19 positive individuals is on the rise and reaching critical capacity in Miami-Dade. The mayor of Miami-Dade just closed down restaurants this week. It makes no sense for me to empty out restaurants but pack schools. So I have a responsibility not only to educate our children, but actually to provide for their well-being and safety. And that's something I do not take lightly. We are prepared to teach kids in a physical way, but only when the conditions improve to a satisfactory level that meets, quite frankly, federal and state guidelines. We are still in Miami-Dade in phase 1. We have not transitioned to phase 2. During phase 1, we cannot open schools.
Now, the Trump administration has argued that the social, psychological, and educational costs of keeping children at home any longer would actually be worse than the virus itself. What's your response to that?
Look, we pay close attention, obviously, to the not only cognitive development of children, but also the social and emotional well-being. And we have established hotlines of support for parents, students, even our employees. Obviously, the best place for children to learn is in school. But considering the current conditions in our community that I described earlier, the return to physical schooling under the current health threat, and quite frankly, considering the White House's own reopening plan, which declares that during phase 1, physical schooling cannot take place. So we will provide the social and emotional support to children via secure, safe, distance means. But let's work together to modify the conditions in our community by following the restrictions, improving conditions, reducing the positivity rate for us to safely return kids to school. There's a fair balance that we need to reach, and one should not compromise the other.
It seems like all of our options are reasonably problematic, whether it's in-person classes, distance learning, or some combination of the two. So let's say that costs and politics were not at all an issue. What kind of creative solutions do you think that we could explore? And if there's a good option, what's the biggest hurdle?
Look, I think we've developed a number of options that are very viable. The school board in Miami-Dade unanimously approved last week a plan that was absolutely endorsed by health experts, including a former Surgeon General of the United States. And that includes a 5-day in-school option when conditions improve, when the positivity rate declines maybe to a 10% level, but also offers a number of options for parents, hybrid models with alternating cycles of students in school and at home. Also, a continuous remote learning option with certified teachers following a schedule with a specific cohort of students. There are creative ways that we can teach children while keeping them safe. And by the way, this is not only about the kids. I know there's a lot of research, a lot of conversation about the fact that children are more resilient to this virus. That is true. However, children are in daily contact with their parents, their grandparents, with their teachers. And even though as a school system, we will heighten the safety precautions, kids will be wearing masks in school. We will intensify our sanitization cycles, but at a time when positivity is on the rise, at a time when, quite frankly, the local economy is retracting once again by shutting down restaurants, it seems to me to be illogical to force teachers and students back into schools.
And just quickly, just want to go back to that idea of remote learning. Are you concerned that kids may fall back as far as their course, their curriculum, if there are several more months of remote learning?
I'm absolutely concerned. Look, during the last quarter of last school year, I predicted that probably we are ushering into a historic condition of academic regression, meaning learning loss, particularly impacting the most fragile kids in America. Poor kids, kids who are English language learners, and students with disabilities. That's why we ought to return to normal schooling in a physical way when conditions improve. And if we want to have an impact on improving conditions, we better do a better job in terms of the restrictions we should follow to ensure that the number of cases are actually reduced. And I don't think in communities across the country that is happening.
Superintendent Carvalho, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insight tonight.
Thank you.
And now to the Supreme Court, which today handed down two major decisions involving subpoenas for President Trump's taxes and financial records. Now, for years, the president has fought to keep those documents private. And tonight, the court said that Congress, a New York prosecutor, and the public may still have to wait a bit longer. Here's Devin Dwyer.
On the final day of its term, a unanimous Supreme Court declared President Trump is not above the law, rejecting his claims of absolute immunity from subpoenas for his financial records.
The president is just like anybody else when it comes to certain kinds of legal actions. And here, just because he's the president doesn't permit him to block this investigation from going forward.
In a separate decision, the justices chided Congress, saying its request for Trump's personal records may be too broad.
What it did say is that Congress didn't do its homework in figuring out exactly what it needed the documents for and what its power was in requesting those documents.
House Democrats said they needed the documents to help write ethics and anti-corruption laws. A New York prosecutor wants 10 years of Trump's tax returns to probe possible fraud. In a pair of 7-2 decisions written by Chief Justice John Roberts, the subpoenas remain in play but must be reviewed again by lower courts.
Well, the rulings were basically starting all over again, sending everything back down to the lower courts, and you start all over again. And so from a certain point, I'm satisfied. From another point, I'm not satisfied.
On Twitter, the president blasted the cases as a political prosecution. He was fuming in private, sources tell ABC News, upset his appointees to the court, Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, failed to strike down the subpoenas. The White House press secretary had a different take.
They essentially laid out a roadmap. His justices did not rule against it.
But on the New York grand jury subpoena, the justices were unanimous. Roberts writing, "No citizen, not even the president, is categorically above the common duty to produce evidence when called upon in a criminal proceeding."
The Supreme Court has now said, guess what? It is constitutionally permissible to investigate a sitting president, and that has the backward implications that it is also potentially constitutionally permissible to indict a sitting president.
In a separate case, Roberts wrote that Congress has the power to seek personal records of a president, but not without a careful analysis, one he said still needs to be done. Without limits on its subpoena powers, Roberts warned, Congress could exert an imperious control over the executive branch and aggrandize itself at the president's expense.
The Supreme Court, including the president's appointees, have declared that he is not above the law. The path that the Supreme Court has laid out is one that is clearly achievable by us in the lower court, and we will continue to go down that path.
President Trump is the first in modern American history to not publicly release tax returns or divest from business interests while in office.
While I'm under audit, I would not give my taxes. There's no law whatsoever.
The IRS has said Trump can release his taxes at any time, but the president has dismissed the need.
And Devin Dwyer joins us now from the Supreme Court. Devin, we just heard the president there dismiss the need to provide his financial records. So what do these rulings really mean as far as whether that could still happen before Americans actually vote in November?
Lindsay, it's still quite possible that President Trump will have to turn over these records, including his tax returns. But today's ruling means it's much less likely that will happen before November. House Democrats now need to go back to court to justify those subpoenas. And even in New York, where legal experts say that prosecutor has a much stronger case, well, grand jury proceedings, as you know, Lindsay, are secret by law. And so the public, if that case moves ahead more quickly, will still not be able to get to see the documents.
And this was, of course, the final day of the term, and the court also handed down a major decision involving Oklahoma and Native American rights. Explain the ruling and also its significance.
Yeah, this was a big one, Lindsay. The Supreme Court today ruled that most of eastern Oklahoma, including the major city of Tulsa, are part of tribal land. Take a look at this map from a century ago. It shows the land that we're talking about here. Justice Gorsuch today had the opinion in the case. He was joined by the liberal justices. They said Congress 200 years ago created a reservation system in a treaty with Native Americans, and that treaty still applies today. As for the impact in this case, the court said when it comes to prosecuting tribal members for crimes, state officials no longer have jurisdiction. But Lindsay, tonight, more than anything, tribal leaders are celebrating this as a victory for Native American rights, saying they can govern themselves, and long overdue recognition that treaties matter. Lindsay?
Yeah, certainly a long time coming. Devin, thanks so much for your reporting.
You bet.
Another staggering 1.3 million Americans filed for unemployment claims last week. That's the 16th week in a row that the number has been above 1 million. 18 million total are now collecting benefits. The U.S. economy clearly has a long road back to recovery. And today, the Democrats' presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, outlined his economic plan, including $700 billion in government spending to develop technology and a Buy American program. ABC's Mary Bruce has the details.
Hey, buddy, how are you? Joe Biden today in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, touring a manufacturing plant and challenging the president on Trump's signature issue, the economy.
Donald Trump loves to talk and talk and talk. But after 3.5 years of big promises, what did the American people have to show for all the talk?
Biden ripped into Trump's response to the pandemic, saying he's making matters worse.
And his failures come with a terrible human cost and deep economic toll. Time and again, working families are paying the price for this administration's incompetence.
Biden stopping by his childhood home in nearby Scranton.
Well, I couldn't come to Scranton without coming by the old house.
And outlining his plan for an economic comeback. including investing $300 billion in new technologies and $400 billion to power demand for American-made products. A plan Biden says will create 5 million new jobs and be paid for by reversing Trump's tax cuts for wealthiest Americans.
Our thanks to Mary Bruce. And now to the haunting new details about George Floyd's final moments. 20 times he said he couldn't breathe. That's according to newly released transcripts of police body cameras. He begged for his life, and his final words, not just for his deceased mother, but also for his children. Alex Perez files this report.
Tonight, chilling details of transcripts of body camera recordings revealing what George Floyd and the officers charged with aiding and abetting his murder were saying in his last moments. Floyd at least 24 times said he couldn't breathe and used the word please nearly 6 times. Officers Thomas Lane and J. Alexander King arrived after Floyd was accused of passing a fake 20. The moment Floyd is approached by the officers, he is apologizing. Nervous, he says, because of past experiences with police. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Adding, I got shot the same way, Mr. Officer, before. When they try to move him to the squad car, Floyd tells them he's claustrophobic and reveals he had recently recovered from coronavirus. The documents filed as part of a motion in court to dismiss charges against rookie officer Thomas Lane, who maintains he was just following orders from the man with his knee on Floyd's neck, Derek Chauvin.
He did not have any knowledge that Chauvin was murdering this guy.
As Floyd complained that he couldn't breathe, Chauvin told him, then stop talking, stop yelling. It takes a heck of a lot of oxygen to talk. Some of Floyd's last words, the records show, Mom, I love you. Tell my kids I love them. I'm dead.
Just so incredibly disturbing. And we're joined now by Alex Perez. Alex, where do the criminal cases against these 4 ex-officers stand?
Well, Lindsay, former officer Thomas Lane has pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors have until August to respond to that motion to dismiss charges, but the judge has already set a potential trial date for all 4 defendants in March of next year. Lindsay?
And why did the judge issue the gag order today?
Well, yeah, Lindsay, the judge had warned that this was a possibility if attorneys would not stop talking to the media, and they continued to do so. So today he issued this gag order for all of the attorneys involved. He says he wants to take every step possible to try to avoid tainting a potential jury pool. Lindsay?
Okay, Alex Perez, thank you so much for your reporting as always. There's also news tonight about the shooting death of Brianna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. For the first time, we're now hearing police interviews with Taylor's boyfriend, who was with her when police barged into their home, and with the sergeant who led the late-night raid that led to Taylor's death. ABC's Steve Osinsami has the latest on what these interviews reveal.
It remains clear tonight that Louisville Metro Police were at the wrong home. And in a police interview recorded just hours after the killing in March, the boyfriend who survived the encounter says that he and his girlfriend, Brianna Taylor, had no idea who was trying to break into their apartment.
I just let off one shot. Like, I still can't see who it is or anything. So now the door's like flying open. Then all of a sudden there's a whole lot of shots.
The 26-year-old was a local ambulance technician, a true lifesaver, and was killed when police returned gunfire. You see her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, being arrested here in the parking lot. They tried to charge him with trying to kill police officers, but those charges were later dropped. In another newly released interview, we hear from the highest-ranking officer who was at the couple's door trying to execute the no-knock warrant.
And do you remember the name of the target on the search warrant?
Not offhand. His interview happened weeks later, and Sergeant John Mattingly told investigators he couldn't remember whose name was on the warrant or if police announced who they were when they first started banging on the door.
You said you guys didn't initially announce?
No, the first bang on the door did not announce. I think after that we did. After that, each one of them had police come to the door, search warrant, police search warrant.
Steve Osinsami joins us now. Steve, Brianna Taylor's boyfriend also told investigators that he spoke to one of the officers that night. What does he claim that the officer said, and what's the current status of the investigation?
He's saying that one of the officers who was on the scene at the time told him that what happened, the shooting, was a misunderstanding, essentially admitting to him on the scene that the officers were at the wrong place, should never have been at the apartment. The status of this investigation at this point, one of the officers, one of the three, has been fired. There have been no charges in this case, and of course, calls from across the country for some sort of action, some charges against these officers.
Some semblance of justice. Okay, Steve Osunsami, thanks so much for your reporting. And when we come back, the unbelievable images from a deadly tornado outbreak. Plus, we're tracking Tropical Storm Faye, where it will hit and how bad it might be. And that couple seen pulling a gun on a black woman outside a Chipotle, they speak out why they claim they did it. And just how safe are America's restaurants? So many business owners now struggling to stay open. The laws continue to change. Our in-depth look at eating out during a pandemic. Stay with us.
She got the gun on me. He wanted to hit me with the car. Call him. I'm telling.
Yeah, the woman who pulled a gun on a black family in a Michigan parking lot. Well, she's now speaking out. Jillian Woostenberg, seen in this video, which culminates with her screaming with her finger on the trigger. The incident escalating after Woostenberg allegedly bumped into the daughter of an African-American mother. Then Woostenberg talked to our station in Detroit.
I turned around and the young girl was looking at me, and she was clearly upset from the look on her face. She came out and started yelling at me, and I just held my left hand up and said, "Walk away, just walk away." And it escalated from there. It's really hard to watch. The more I see it, the more I realize I'm more afraid of that situation now than I was then.
So you felt like you had no choice at that point but to pull the gun?
Yeah.
Is that what was in your mind?
Yeah, just, I need to live. I need to survive.
Woostenberg and her husband have been charged with felonious assault. If convicted, they could serve up to 4 years in prison. As summer kicks into full gear, actually, as states earlier, several states are reconsidering outright reversing the opening of bars and indoor dining and eateries as coronavirus rapidly spreads through parts of the country. And as you heard earlier, the Arizona governor just announced the state will reduce indoor dining capacity to 50%. So just what is the risk? Ariel Reshef has this report.
It's like, what's this for? It's like we got a big sign.
For restaurant and bar owner Steve Wegman, the COVID-19 crisis has dealt a major blow to business.
Here comes coronavirus knocking on the door, and you go from, $100,000 a week in sales to $5,000.
Steve's bar, the 507, was linked to an outbreak of cases in Mankato, Minnesota. One of his employees testing positive for the virus after it reopened, forcing him to shut down again. Since then, he says, it's been a struggle.
Basically, your world is collapsing. I mean, you're going to be marked. You're going to be, what are the ramifications? Are you going to be held to certain accountabilities and whatnot? So, you just don't know what's going on.
With mounting reports of clusters linked to local bars and restaurants in several parts of the country, and with images like these of packed public spaces, The nation's top infectious disease doctor now urging that shutting down bars could be key to stemming community spread as new nationwide cases surge to more than 50,000 per day.
Fundamental things like masking, distancing, washing hands, closing bars. If you do that, I think it'll be a giant step towards interfering with the spread in your community.
Some officials from coast to coast reversing course. To date, at least 21 states rolling back reopenings. Florida seeing record numbers, now exceeding 220,000 cases since the beginning of the pandemic. Miami shutting down indoor dining, bars, clubs, and other establishments.
We don't impose these rules for government's sake. We impose them to protect our residents and protect our visitors.
And in Texas, one of the first states to reopen, a surge in cases surpassing 200,000. Houston bar owner Bevan Biggers says it's been a personal and painful balance to work as COVID rages on.
I did not expect to be in this situation and watching people around me die. Yeah, because I've lost 2 family members to COVID already.
Bevan says she also lost her job after she spoke out about cases at the restaurant where she was employed.
I had symptoms. Other coworkers had symptoms, and I wouldn't be doing my job as the main bartender there because I can't keep doing this back and forth, risking my life, risking people around me because, when I go to work, I come back home and, I have people around me that I don't want to hurt either.
Biggers' employer reportedly denies firing her, stating she's been taken off the schedule for 2 weeks after experiencing symptoms of illness. The Texas governor now shutting down bars and limiting restaurants to 50% capacity as states and cities weigh the economic and public health costs and benefits of reopening certain industries. Businesses like Steve's are facing an uncertain future.
Every day we're being told that maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that, maybe we should do this. Now we have to do that. So, at the end of the day, you're going to get the answer, but we're just not there.
But after months of safer-at-home measures, Americans are hungrier than ever for a taste of normalcy. So what are the risks at restaurants and bars? And should they outweigh America's appetite for dining and drinking out?
I think that it's very important to realize that, we have to think of individual risk.
Dr. Todd Ellerin is a leading infectious disease specialist and vice chairman of the Department of Medicine at South Shore Hospital in Weymouth, Massachusetts.
Do you believe that states rushed to reopen bars and restaurants too soon?
In the United States, we have really a patchwork, so it's a very heterogeneous place. So I think, for instance, in my region in Massachusetts, clearly case percentage was down, hospitalizations down, so it made sense. In other states, there seems to have been probably a rush to too early of an opening.
If you're heading out to a restaurant, is there anything you should take with you?
I think obviously our mask is vital, and we should be wearing it as much as possible. Disinfectant, a hand gel, for example, with alcohol, 60% alcohol to clean our hands. I think that's reasonable to take to a restaurant. So just a reminder that when you're in a bar or restaurant and you're drinking alcohol, that you may become less inhibited and decrease the amount of social or physical distancing, which could potentially put you at increased risk.
And what about all those touch points, surfaces, condiments, silverware? Dr. Ellerin says, get out your disinfectant wipes.
If your goal is to decrease transmission as much as possible, then that type of disinfecting practices may make sense for you.
Is it safer for people to be eating outside?
There is no question that it is safer to eat or drink outside rather than indoors. In fact, when you look at outbreaks around the world, and especially ones that have been analyzed in China and Japan, almost all of them have occurred indoors.
Studies out of China now showing that a woman who traveled from Wuhan to the city of Guangzhou near Hong Kong and ate at a restaurant transmitted COVID to 9 other people, some of whom were as many as 15 feet away. This week, a group of scientists also suggesting coronavirus may be infectious in the air, a concern the World Health Organization says it is examining.
We're also looking at the possible role of airborne transmission in other settings where you have particularly closed settings where you have poor ventilation.
It's important that indoor businesses, restaurants, bars, whatever, make sure they maximize their ventilation systems. That may significantly reduce the likelihood of transmission indoors.
When it comes to your risk, the CDC cautions that the more individuals interact with others and the longer that interaction, the higher the risk to spread COVID-19. The lowest risk when it comes to restaurants, drive-through, delivery, takeout, and curbside pickup. The next best thing, dining out where seating capacity is reduced to allow tables to be spaced at least 6 feet apart. The highest risk, indoor and outdoor dining where seating capacity is not reduced and tables are not spaced at least 6 feet apart. For his part, Wegman says his restaurants will do all they can to keep customers and staff safe as they navigate these uncertain times.
Whereas in the past, if you had a fever or a cough, you might bully an employee to come in because, hey, we're going to be short-staffed. Nowadays, you're saying, if you have a tickled throat, stay home because we're not bringing that in. That's our emphasis now, where food and drink and making money is sidetracked to getting people to feel safe and to stay safe.
If we remember the key components of COVID infection prevention, then I think we're going to be in good shape.
Ariel Reshef, ABC News, New York.
Our thanks to Ariel for that informative piece. And still ahead on Prime, why President Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, is now heading back to prison just weeks after his early release. The gloves so many are using during this pandemic and the risk that they may pose on the environment and how we can protect our planet. Ginger Z brings us another installment of It's Not Too Late. And with today's Supreme Court ruling on the president's taxes, we take a closer look at his finances. But first, our tweet of the day, celebrations in Oklahoma after today's historic ruling. And welcome back, everyone. Today's Supreme Court rulings have made it possible for the public to someday, after the election, see more of President Trump's tax and business records. Now, while there's still so much that we don't know about President Trump's finances, here's what we do know by the numbers. Trump was the first U.S. president in 39 years to refuse to make his tax returns public. Trump listed more than 200 assets, mostly limited liability companies, in the latest financial disclosure report that he's required to file each year. Now, this gives us a partial view of his holdings. Trump's assets may be worth between $930 million and $1.7 billion, according to an analysis by the Center for Responsive Politics. But the other side of the balance sheet, Trump's debts, are even harder to determine from his partial disclosures. Altogether, Trump's businesses made at least $435 million in revenue in 2018. That's down from $452 million the previous year. The Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. brought in $40 million in 2018. And Mar-a-Lago, the so-called winter White House in Palm Beach, made $22 million in 2018. The New York Times reported an alleged 1995 tax record showing a massive loss that may have allowed Trump to pay no federal income taxes for 18 years. Now, President Trump still has not filed his financial disclosure report for 2019. This week, the White House said it was given a second extension due to the pandemic. And we still have a lot to report here on Crime. Coming up, the remarkable reunion. Our cameras are there as a man who spent 25 years behind bars until his conviction was overturned. He meets his grandchild for the very first time. The boy found alone on board a boat in the middle of a California lake, and the desperate search for his mother, an actress on the show Glee. And coffee drinkers, you're going to want to listen up. We'll tell you all about a new rule coming to a Starbucks near you. But first, here's some trending stories on abcnews.com.
New video shows long lines of people waiting to get tested in Phoenix, Arizona, the state battling a staggering 34% rate of positivity and the globe's highest rate of infection.
We cannot do enough testing to keep up with how many positives we're having.
Today, there's a new executive order that will limit indoor dining to less than 50% occupancy.
Cases there, plus those in Florida and South Carolina, growing faster than anywhere else in the world. 56 hospitals in Florida have 0 ICU beds available, according to an internal FEMA memo obtained by ABC News.
We've dispatched 100 contract nurses that we had under contract down to Miami-Dade, another 100 for the Tampa Bay area.
We went from shutting down to opening up in a way that essentially skipped over all the guideposts. That's not the way to go. We've got to rethink that and do it different.
The Supreme Court ruling that a Manhattan prosecutor can have a look at President Trump's tax records, but Congress can't for now.
Chief Justice John Roberts in the 7-2 opinion was also very clear
clear that no one is above the law, writing, quote, "In our judicial system, the public has a right to every man's evidence. The earliest days of the republic, every man has included the president of the United States," end quote. But the justices giving President Trump a chance to raise further arguments in a lower court.
This is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt. It's a hoax.
Democrats on Capitol Hill also vow to keep fighting.
He is not above the law.
Communities are picking up the pieces. One person is dead, 2 others hospitalized after a tornado ripped through western Minnesota. In all, 25 reported tornadoes tore across 4 states, from Colorado to Minnesota. We're also tracking Tropical Storm Faye, forming just off the Carolinas. Heavy rain, gusty winds, and possible flooding from D.C. to Rhode Island starting as early as tomorrow.
President Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, has been taken back into federal custody after his early release to serve the remainder of his term at home because of the coronavirus pandemic.
His attorney says Cohen objected to a gag order because he has a book coming out.
I've never seen any language like this in my life that would strip a person of their First Amendment rights to communicate with the media.
Cohen was recently spotted at a restaurant on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, but that did not appear to have any bearing on today's action because his formal home confinement agreement was not yet in place.
If you want to satisfy that caffeine craving, Starbucks says you'll need a face mask. The company announced it will now require facial coverings in all 9,000 of its company-owned American stores starting July 15th. That's regardless of local laws. Those who are unable or refuse to wear a mask, they'll be able to order via curbside delivery or drive-through. As for Starbucks workers, they've been wearing masks since April.
The search for a missing mother who starred in the show Glee continues. Authorities believe that Naya Rivera drowned while boating and swimming with her 4-year-old son. He was found by himself on board a boat alone. He says that they went for a swim. He returned onto the boat, but she did not. An adult life vest was found on board. Imagine spending 25 years behind bars for a crime you did not commit, finally getting released only to enter into a world locked down by a pandemic. This is the heartbreaking turned heartwarming story of one New York man and his family.
Come on, Ari, let's go meet Grandpa. You ready to meet Grandpa? Huh?
Sean Pacheco was forced to grow up without his dad. He's now 26 years old, and for mostly all of his life, his father was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. Yet Sean's belief in his father's innocence has never wavered.
My father speaks sincere, and everything that my father said was true, because he never once told me a lie.
Back in 1995, his father, Christian Pacheco, was one of several men implicated in a murder, a crime he says he tried to prevent, a good deed that didn't go unpunished.
I don't regret helping him. Honestly, I don't. That's the kind of person that I am.
After new evidence proved he didn't do it, in February, a judge overturned his conviction.
My father always told me he was innocent, and I could see the sincereness in his heart.
For someone who's already lost so much, his best friend, the man who picked him up from prison when he was released, has recently passed away from COVID.
But he never gave up on me, He knew that I had nothing to do with whatever I was convicted of, and he gave me his word that he was going to help me out to come home to my family, to my loved ones, and he always did, He was always there for me.
It wasn't just Christian who paid the price. Sean did too. He had to be raised by a single parent, his mother, who was just 15 when she had him, and visits to his father behind bars were always too short.
It was heartbreaking because I knew at the end of the day I had to leave my father. I always cried, I tried not to. I always cried. Eventually when I got home, I cried.
Growing up, Sean found a life in the Navy, traveling the world. He got married and had a daughter, and recently moved back to the United States last year. Now his father, 43 years old, after spending all of his adult life in prison, is about to see his family for the first time in 25 years as a free man.
I believe that this is one of the reasons why I always fought, for my freedom. It was so I can prove to him that his dad is not a killer.
Sean moved to San Diego last year, and now his father is flying there from New York to reunite. The family finally reunited.
Love you, bro.
Sean's daughter, Ari, is seeing Grandpa with her own eyes for the first time.
Why are you so sad, huh? Huh?
Now Christian is looking forward, making up for lost time, and being a steady and regular part of his granddaughter's future, something he was robbed of with his own son.
Since I wasn't there for my son, I want to be part of my granddaughter's life. I want to see her grow up, you know. I always knew this day was going to happen. And right now, you know, it's amazing. It's awesome.
Such a touching moment. And when we return, do you know what an ethane cracker is? If you don't know, you're about to learn a valuable lesson. Stay with us. Those in New York may have noticed that dead fish are turning up in large numbers along the Hudson River. According to an environmental group that monitors the waterway, the unrelenting summer heat and climate change could be to blame. High temperatures can overheat the water, decreasing oxygen in the river for aquatic life. And if you've been noticing a lot of gloves and masks on the street lately, well, you're certainly not alone. But that's not all. Plastic production across the country is poised to dramatically expand, and it's from a type of factory that you probably haven't even heard of before. The debate now is whether all that plastic is a good or bad thing. Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z explains in this week's It's Not Too Late.
I'm Ginger Z, and it's not too late. Here are a few of the environmental headlines that you might have missed this week. I feel like I show flooding video like that almost every day on GMA. 3 to 5 inches, it's flash flood emergency. Flood warning through Indiana, Ohio, into North Carolina. And thanks to a new study, we now know that these videos are telling a hidden story. 14.6 million homes and businesses are at risk of severe flooding. You can see all the neighborhoods highlighted there. That's almost twice as many as FEMA originally thought. The other map here. The group that did this study added sea level rise, rainfall, and flooding in smaller creeks to their equations. Now, from floods in the U.S. to extreme heat in Siberia. On June 20th, Verkhoyansk, Russia, reported a preliminary all-time record high of 100 degrees. The Arctic is among the fastest warming regions in the world, heating it twice the global average. And now the topic that you need to know more about this week: ethane crackers. I know, it sounds like a terrible twist on a tasty snack, but instead of the snack itself, an ethane cracker is an industrial plant, and it helps make the packaging that you might find your snack in. The plastic packaging that you might break into after, I don't know, you throw your gloves and mask in the parking lot at the grocery store, or on a sidewalk, or in the street, or even in a planter. I mean, I'm glad you're wearing the mask, but my goodness, who does this? I'm gonna get to explaining more about those ethane crackers and what you need to know, but am I the only one seeing a lot of this litter these days? It wasn't really a rhetorical question, I actually already asked you, and then you answered. From your pictures, California, Texas, New Jersey, all of it tells me that COVID litter is everywhere. The French nonprofit operation MerProp has already found gloves and masks in the Mediterranean Sea. One of their Facebook posts from the group says they worry that they will eventually have more gloves than jellyfish.
That one mask probably represents hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of microplastic particles when it all gets broken down.
That was Dr. Mark Benfield. He studies microplastics and has a new study on COVID waste.
In Crown Heights, 170 gloves per hectare.
Wow. That's 416 gloves on every block in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
And he said that almost every single one of those gloves is going to wash into storm drains and then into the ocean. Now, medical professionals should and absolutely need disposable PPE, but this ABC study shows that you don't. Not only are the reusable masks better for the environment, but in this study, a folded fabric mask kept those COVID droplets closer to the face, closer and better than the cone version that was bought at the store. And how about gloves? World consumption of vinyl gloves is estimated to jump more than 11% to 330 billion pieces this year.
The sad reality is 9 million metric tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. And scientists tell us that unless we change the way we use plastic, within the decade, for every 3 pounds of fish in the ocean, there will be 1 pound of plastic.
And now the U.S. is planning to make even more plastic because we are building ethane crackers. Told you I'd get back to it. An ethane cracker is an industrial plant that takes ethane, it's a gas, and then cracks the gas molecules into the basic compounds that make up plastic. The American Chemistry Council says that 343 new plastic production plants and expansions are currently permitted or planned in the United States. Globally, in the next 5 years, the rate of plastic production has been projected to increase by 1/3. In 5 years. And then by 2050, it is expected to triple. That is a lot of plastic.
So how, when we all see pictures of the oceans full of plastic, how do we say making more plastic is a good thing?
Well, plastics, as we talked about, provide important benefits to society. Lightweighting our cars, packaging our food, keeping it safe for society. But we need to keep it out of the environment.
Many of the proposed plants are in Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, like Royal Dutch Shell's new facility 25 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. It's a spot that President Trump recently visited.
Powerful, clean, natural gas.
In the ACC report, they say that the Appalachian petrochemical industry is going to create more than 68,000 direct and indirect jobs by 2025. And plastic, they say, is a better alternative for shipping than glass.
We can't go back to alternative materials. The alternatives, in the case of packaging, would double greenhouse gas emissions.
Environmentalists don't think that the benefits outweigh the other risks.
This is the petrochemical industry trying to save the fossil fuel industry. And states like Pennsylvania, shockingly, are subsidizing this.
We looked it up. The state of Pennsylvania created up to $1.6 billion in tax incentives for ethane cracker facilities like the one in Monaca, Pennsylvania. The requirement, at least 2,500 construction jobs.
There have been studies done on these new facilities. They're modern, state-of-the-art facilities. They are lower impact than others built in other parts of the world.
So I keep trying to say to myself, somebody's gonna make the plastic, so it might as well be us, right? Better if we had real control over how it was disposed of, reducing shipping, growing local, even if that growth is in plastic. But we'd have to do it that way, and we'd have to do it well, and it would actually have to be recycled.
The plastic recycling rate is an anemic 8% nationwide. My greatest fear is that a number of these ethane cracker facilities are built, locking us into more fossil fuel use and more chemical use. These ethane cracker facilities, almost always proposed in low-income communities of color, need not to be constructed. The good news is that we don't encounter plastic pollution deniers like the way we encounter climate deniers. I think this is an issue that people really care about, and it's something that they can do at the local level.
Here's the simplest truth of this story. Nobody wants plastic in the ocean. France is looking to increase littering fines to combat COVID pollution. The European Commission already pressing on with its single-use plastics ban despite pressures from lobbyists. And in Australia, they came up with a really simple one and ask for all of us, or anyone who can, to go plastic-free in July. Or just do a week in July. Give it up, they say, and be a part of the solution to plastic pollution. I'm Ginger Z, and I promise it's not too late.
And got to find trash cans for those gloves and masks. Our thanks to Ginger Z for that. And before we go tonight, our image of the day. Vice President Mike Pence practicing proper social distancing, bumping forearms with a congressman at a Pennsylvania airport ahead of a planned bus tour. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.